The autumn rain drummed against the windows of the Boston Herald newsroom as Sarah Mitchell stared at the anonymous letter that had arrived 3 days ago. The paper was cheap, the handwriting shaky, but the words burned into her memory. They hurt us. They made us disappear. St. Augustine's isn't what people think it is. Still obsessing over that letter? Marcus Chen, her editor, approached with 2 steaming cups of coffee. At 45, Marcus had seen enough conspiracy theories and false leads to fill a cemetery, but he trusted Sarah's instincts more than most. It's not obsession, Marcus, it's intuition. Sarah accepted the coffee gratefully, her green eyes never leaving the letter. St. Augustine's Monastery has been Boston's pride for over 2 centuries. Founded in 1798, it survived wars, scandals, economic crashes, but this could be from any disgruntled former employee or someone with a grudge, Marcus interrupted, settling into the chair across from her cluttered desk. You know how these religious institutions attract both the devout and the delusional. Sarah shook her head, her auburn hair catching the fluorescent light. I've been doing preliminary research. In the past 13 years, there have been unusual patterns. Missing person reports that were quickly closed, families who suddenly stopped asking questions, and a surprising number of donations to keep certain stories quiet. The newsroom buzzed around them with the familiar chaos of deadline pressure. Phones rang incessantly, keyboards clattered, and the coffee machine worked overtime. But in their corner, a different kind of tension was building. How many are we talking about? Marcus asked, his skepticism beginning to waver. So far? I've found traces of 217 individuals who had some connection to St. Augustine's and then vanished from public record. Not all missing persons, mind you. Some just stopped talking, stopped pursuing complaints, stopped existing in any meaningful way that would threaten the monastery's reputation. Marcus leaned back, processing the number. St. Augustine's Monastery sat on 12 acres in Boston's historic district, its Gothic spires visible from downtown. Brother Thomas Whitmore had been its abbot for 15 years, transforming it from a struggling religious community into a thriving center for spiritual retreats, youth programs, and community outreach. The monastery hosted senators, business leaders, and celebrities seeking spiritual guidance. Sarah, you're talking about one of the most respected religious institutions in New England. Brother Thomas has been nominated for humanitarian awards. The monastery's youth programs have helped thousands of at-risk kids. Which makes it the perfect cover, Sarah replied, pulling out a manila folder thick with documents. I've been tracking financial records, public statements, and cross-referencing them with police reports and missing person cases. The pattern is there, Marcus. It's subtle, sophisticated, but it's there. She spread photographs across her desk. Young faces, mostly male, ages ranging from 14 to 25. Some were from the monastery's own promotional materials, others from missing person flyers that had long since been taken down. Look at this, Sarah pointed to a photograph of a 17-year-old named David Restrepo. He was part of the monastery's summer program in 2018. His family filed a missing person report when he didn't come home. 3 weeks later, they withdrew the report and moved to Florida. No forwarding address, no explanation. Marcus studied the photograph. David had kind eyes and a shy smile, the kind of kid who probably trusted adults implicitly. And this one, Sarah continued, indicating another photo. Michael Torres, 19, was working in the monastery's kitchen while attending community college. His roommate reported him missing when he didn't return to their apartment. The case was closed when someone claiming to be Michael called the police saying he'd decided to find himself traveling across the country. But Michael's bank account was never accessed after that call, and his family never heard from him again. The rain outside intensified, creating a steady percussion against the windows. Marcus felt a chill that had nothing to do with Boston's October weather, "What's your next step?" he asked quietly. "I need to get inside. I need to talk to current and former residents, staff members, anyone who might have seen something. But more importantly, I need to find someone willing to go on record. That's going to be nearly impossible. If what you're suggesting is true, these people are either too scared to talk or they've been silenced permanently." Sarah's phone buzzed with a text message. She glanced at it and her face went pale. "What is it?" "It's from the same number that's been calling me for the past week. I never answer because I don't recognize it." She showed Marcus the screen. "Stop digging or you'll disappear too. Last warning." Marcus stood up abruptly. "Sarah, maybe we should—" "No." Her voice was firm, resolute. "This just confirms we're onto something. Someone is scared enough to threaten me, which means there's truth to uncover." She gathered the photographs and documents, her movements. Quick and determined. "I'm going to St. Augustine's tomorrow. I'll pose as someone interested in their spiritual retreat program." "Absolutely not. If you're right about this, you could be walking into exactly what those 217 people walked into," Sarah finished. "The difference is, I know what I'm looking for, and I have backup. You'll know exactly where I am and when I should check in." As Sarah packed her materials, neither she nor Marcus noticed the figure standing in the shadows across the street from the Herald building, watching their window with intense interest. The figure pulled out a phone and dialed a number that connected directly to St. Augustine's Monastery. "She's getting too close," the voice said quietly. "We need to accelerate the timeline." The line went dead, and the figure disappeared into the rainy Boston night, leaving behind only the echo of footsteps and the promise of danger closing in around Sarah's investigation. The morning sun cast long shadows across the cobblestone path, leading to St. Augustine's Monastery as Sarah approached the imposing Gothic entrance. The building's limestone walls had weathered 2 centuries of New England seasons, and ivy crept up the sides like nature's attempt to reclaim the structure. Despite the beauty of the architecture, Sarah felt an inexplicable chill as she rang the brass bell beside the heavy wooden door. "Welcome, my child." Brother Thomas Whitmore himself answered the door, his warm smile immediately disarming. At 58, he possessed the kind of gentle authority that made people want to confess their deepest secrets. His gray hair was perfectly groomed, his brown robes immaculate, and his blue eyes sparkled with what seemed like genuine kindness. "Brother Thomas, thank you for seeing me on such short notice," Sarah said, extending her hand. She had called the previous evening, claiming to be a stressed marketing executive seeking spiritual guidance. "I'm Catherine Walsh. I spoke with someone yesterday about your retreat programs." "Of course, Catherine. Please come in." His handshake was firm, but not aggressive, and he gestured for her to follow him through a corridor lined with religious artwork and photographs of the monastery's charitable work. The interior was a study in contrasts. Ancient stone walls were softened by warm lighting and comfortable furniture. The air smelled of incense and old books, creating an atmosphere of peace and contemplation. Yet Sarah's trained eye noticed the security cameras discreetly positioned throughout the hallways, and the fact that several doors required key-card access. "Tell me about what brings you to us," Brother Thomas said as they settled into his office, a spacious room with floor-to-ceiling bookshelves and a large window overlooking the monastery's gardens. Sarah had rehearsed her cover story carefully. "I work in corporate marketing, and the stress has been overwhelming. I've been having trouble sleeping, difficulty concentrating. A friend mentioned that your retreat programs have helped many professionals find balance." "Indeed they have." Brother Thomas leaned forward, his expression compassionate. "We've had the privilege of helping many people rediscover their spiritual center. Our programs are quite comprehensive: meditation, counseling, community service, and for those who feel called to it, extended stays where participants can truly disconnect from the pressures of modern life." "Extended stays?" Sarah asked, trying to keep her voice casual. Some of our guests find that a weekend retreat isn't sufficient for true transformation. We offer month-long programs, sometimes longer, for those seeking deeper spiritual renewal. It requires complete commitment, no outside contact, no distractions from the material world. A knock at the door interrupted their conversation. "Come in," Brother Thomas called. A young man entered, perhaps 22 years old, with hollow eyes and a nervous demeanor. He wore simple work clothes and kept his gaze fixed on the floor. "Brother Thomas, I'm sorry to interrupt. The kitchen needs to know about tonight's meal. Preparations." "Of course, James. This is Catherine. She's interested in our retreat programs." "Catherine, this is James. He's been with us for how long now, James?" 8 months, Brother Thomas." James's voice was barely above a whisper. Sarah studied the young man carefully. Something about his posture, the way he avoided eye contact, reminded her of trauma victims she'd interviewed in previous investigations. "James has found great peace here," Brother Thomas continued. "Haven't you, son?" "Yes, Brother Thomas." "Great peace." The words sounded rehearsed, automatic. After James left, Sarah pressed gently. "He seems quite young to be on such an extended retreat. James came to us in a very troubled state. Family problems, substance abuse, legal difficulties. His transformation has been remarkable, though it's taken considerable time and dedication." "Does he ever see his family?" Brother Thomas's smile flickered almost imperceptibly. Part of true spiritual renewal sometimes requires separation from the influences that led to one's problems in the first place. James's family understands that his healing is the priority. Sarah felt her investigative instincts sharpening. "I'd love to speak with some of your long-term residents, if possible. Hearing their stories might help me understand if this path is right for me. I'm afraid that wouldn't be appropriate. Our extended stay participants have committed to a period of contemplative silence. Outside interactions would compromise their spiritual journey." The conversation continued for another 30 minutes, with Brother Thomas expertly deflecting Sarah's subtle probes while maintaining his warm, pastoral demeanor. He showed her through parts of the monastery, the chapel, the library, the dining hall, but certain areas remained off-limits. "Our private quarters and meditation spaces are reserved for residents only," he explained when Sarah expressed interest in seeing more of the facility. As they walked through the dining hall, Sarah noticed several young men working in the kitchen, all with the same hollow-eyed appearance as James. They moved with mechanical precision, rarely speaking to each other. "Your kitchen staff seems very dedicated," Sarah observed. "They are. Many of our long-term residents contribute to the monastery's daily operations as part of their spiritual practice. Work is prayer, as the saying goes." Near the end of the tour, Sarah excused herself to use the restroom. Instead, she quickly explored a corridor that Brother Thomas had steered her away from earlier. The hallway was lined with doors, each marked only with numbers. She pressed her ear to one and heard what sounded like muffled crying. "Catherine?" Brother Thomas's voice came from behind her, no longer warm but sharp with suspicion. "I believe you've lost your way. I'm so sorry. I was looking for the restroom and got turned around. These old buildings can be like mazes." His smile returned, but it didn't reach his eyes. "Indeed they can. Let me escort you back to the main area." As they walked back, Sarah noticed that Brother Thomas's hand rested on a small device clipped to his belt, some kind of communication system. He pressed it briefly, and within moments, 2 other brothers appeared in the corridor, nodding respectfully but positioning themselves strategically. "I think I have enough information for now," Sarah said, her pulse quickening. "Thank you for your time, Brother Thomas. Of course, I do hope you'll consider joining us for a retreat. I have a feeling you'd find it transformative." As Sarah walked back down the cobblestone path toward her car, She felt eyes watching her from the monastery's windows. She had confirmed her suspicions. Something was deeply wrong at St. Augustine's. The challenge now would be proving it. Without becoming victim number 218, her phone buzzed with a text from Marcus. How did it go? She typed back quickly, "We need to meet, tonight, and Marcus, I think we're going to need help from the FBI." Detective Maria Santos had seen enough human cruelty in her 15 years with the Boston Police Department to develop a thick skin. But something about Sarah Mitchell's evidence made her stomach turn. They sat in a dimly lit corner booth at O'Malley's Pub, 3 blocks from the police station, surrounded by the comfortable noise of after-work conversations and clinking glasses. "You're asking me to believe that one of Boston's most respected religious institutions is running some kind of, what? Kidnapping operation? Human trafficking ring?" Maria's voice was skeptical, but her dark eyes showed she was taking the allegations seriously. Sarah spread copies of her research across the scarred wooden table. "I'm asking you to look at the evidence objectively. 217 people with connections to St. Augustine's who have effectively vanished from society over 13 years. That's more than 16 people per year." Marcus, who had arranged the meeting through his contacts in law enforcement, leaned forward. "Maria, Sarah's track record speaks for itself. Remember the corruption story at City Hall? The pharmaceutical company cover-up? She doesn't chase shadows." Maria studied the photographs and documents, her expression growing more troubled with each page. As a detective specializing in missing persons cases, she recognized several of the faces. "Jesus Christ," she whispered, picking up a photo of David Restrepo. "I remember this case. The family was desperate, then suddenly they weren't. They claimed they'd heard from David, that he was fine and didn't want to be contacted." "But you didn't believe them," Sarah said. "Hell no." The mother's eyes. She was terrified. "But when people withdraw missing person reports and refuse to cooperate, there's not much we can do legally." Sarah pulled out her phone and played an audio recording. "I managed to track down David's sister Carmen. She lives in Miami now. Listen to this." Carmen Restrepo's voice was shaky, frightened. "David would never just disappear like that. He called me every Sunday, without fail, then nothing. When my parents got that call saying he was okay, I knew it wasn't him." The voice was similar, but David had this little stutter when he got nervous. "This person didn't stutter at all. Why didn't your parents pursue it?" Sarah's voice asked on the recording. 2 days after they withdrew the missing person report, my father got a promotion at work. A promotion he'd been passed over for 3 times. And suddenly we had money for my mother's cancer treatments. Money we'd never had before. They were scared, and they were bought." Maria set down her beer, her cop instincts fully engaged. "How many families received similar windfalls? After their loved ones disappeared? At least 40% that I've been able to track. Job promotions, medical bills paid, college scholarships for siblings, mortgage payments mysteriously. Caught up, always through intermediaries, always untraceable back to the monastery directly. And the others?" Sarah's expression darkened. The others were threatened. Or worse. She pulled out another document, this one a police report from 2019. Rebecca Martinez, mother of missing teenager Luis Martinez. She kept pushing for answers about her son's disappearance from the monastery's youth program. 3 weeks after she hired a private investigator, she was found dead in her apartment. Apparent suicide, according to the official report. Maria scanned the report, her frown deepening. "I remember this case too. Something felt off about it, but the evidence supported suicide. Single gunshot wound, her prints on the weapon, no signs of struggle. Except Rebecca Martinez was a devout Catholic who considered suicide a mortal sin. Her sister told me Rebecca was planning to take her story to the media the week she died. The pub's atmosphere suddenly felt oppressive despite the cheerful conversations around them. Maria finished her beer and signaled for another round. Okay, let's say you're right. Let's say St. Augustine's is somehow involved in these disappearances. What's the motive? What are they gaining? Sarah had been dreading this question because the answer was almost too horrific to voice. I think they're selling people, Maria. Young men mostly, but some women too. I found financial records showing large, irregular payments to the monastery from offshore accounts, payments that coincide with disappearances. Selling them to whom? Wealthy individuals with specific tastes. People who can afford to buy human beings for their private use and who have the resources to keep them hidden. Marcus, who had been quietly listening, finally spoke. Sarah, that's a serious accusation. Human trafficking on that scale, involving a religious institution, would be the perfect cover, Maria finished. Who suspects a monastery? Who questions a place dedicated to helping troubled youth find their way? Sarah's phone buzzed with a text message. She glanced at it, and her face went white. What is it? Maria asked. It's from Carmen Restrepo. She says someone broke into her apartment in Miami last night. Nothing was stolen, but they left a message on her bathroom mirror. Stop talking or join your brother. The three of them sat in stunned silence for a moment, the weight of the situation settling over them like a heavy blanket. We need federal help, Maria said finally. If this is real, it's way beyond local jurisdiction. I have a contact at the FBI's Boston field office, Agent Jennifer Walsh. She specializes in organized crime and human trafficking. How quickly can you reach her? Sarah asked. Tonight. But Sarah, you need to be careful. If they're monitoring Carmen in Miami, they're definitely watching you here. As if summoned by her words, Sarah noticed a man at the bar who had been nursing the same drink since they arrived. He was trying too hard to look casual, and when she caught his eye in the mirror behind the bar, he quickly looked away. We're being watched right now, she said quietly. Maria casually turned to look, her trained eye immediately spotting the surveillance. Tall guy, dark coat, pretending to watch the game? That's him. Okay, here's what we're going to do. Marcus, you're going to leave first. Take the back exit through the kitchen. Sarah and I will wait 10 minutes, then leave together through the front. If they follow us, we'll know for certain we're onto something big. As Marcus gathered his things, Sarah felt a mixture of fear and determination. They were close to exposing something monstrous, but the closer they got, the more dangerous it became. Maria, she said quietly, what if we can't prove it? What if they're too powerful, too well connected? Then we keep digging until we can. Because if you're right, there are people trapped in that monastery right now, waiting for someone to save them. And I'll be damned if I'm going to let that continue on my watch. The man at the bar finished his drink and left, but Sarah noticed another figure outside the window and another across the street. They weren't just being watched. They were being surrounded. FBI Agent Jennifer Walsh's office in the John Joseph Moakley United States Courthouse felt like a fortress of federal authority, with its bulletproof windows overlooking Boston Harbor and walls lined with commendations and case files. At 42, Walsh had built her reputation dismantling human trafficking networks across New England, but the evidence spread across her conference table represented something unprecedented in scope and audacity. In 20 years of federal law enforcement, I've never seen anything quite like this, Walsh said, studying the photographs and financial records that Sarah, Marcus, and Detective Santos had compiled over the past week. A religious institution, as a front for human trafficking. It's diabolical in its simplicity. Sarah sat across from her, exhaustion evident in her posture. The past 7 days had been a blur of surveillance, interviews, and sleepless nights. Agent Walsh, we've identified at least 12 families willing to go on record about their missing loved ones. And we have financial evidence showing payments. totaling over $15 million to St. Augustine's from untraceable offshore accounts. The problem, Detective Santos interjected, is that we still don't have direct evidence of what's happening inside the monastery. We need someone on the inside, or we need to catch them in the act. Walsh nodded, her expression grim. We've been conducting our own investigation since Detective Santos contacted me. What we've found corroborates your research, but it also reveals something even more disturbing. She pulled out a thick file marked classified and spread several documents across the table. St. Augustine's isn't operating alone. We've identified connections to similar operations in at least 6 other states. This appears to be part of a larger network, possibly international in scope. Marcus leaned forward, his journalist instincts engaged. How large are we talking? Conservative estimate. Over 1,000 victims across the network in the past decade. The monastery in Boston appears to be one of the primary processing centers for the northeastern United States. Sarah felt sick. Processing centers? They identify vulnerable individuals, runaways, troubled youth, people estranged from their families, and gradually isolate them from the outside world. The monastery's legitimate programs provide perfect cover. By the time these people realize what's happening, they're completely cut off from any support system. Walsh pulled out surveillance photographs taken with long-range lenses. We've been watching the monastery for the past 5 days. Look at this. The photos showed a delivery truck arriving at St. Augustine's at 3 a.m., using a service entrance hidden from public view. Men in dark clothing were unloading what appeared to be large crates. We ran the truck's plates. It's registered to a shell company that traces back to a network of businesses involved in what we euphemistically call private security services. In reality, they're facilitating the movement of human cargo. Detective Santos studied the photos. How often do these deliveries happen? Every 2 weeks like clockwork. Always the same time, always the same route. We believe they're moving people both in and out of the facility. Sarah's phone rang, interrupting the briefing. She glanced at the caller ID and her blood ran cold. It's Brother Thomas. Answer it, Walsh instructed, quickly activating a recording device. Act normal. Sarah accepted the call, putting it on speaker. Hello? Catherine, my dear. This is Brother Thomas from St. Augustine's. I've been thinking about our conversation, and I believe you would benefit greatly from one of our extended retreat programs. His voice was warm, paternal, but Sarah detected an underlying edge. That's very kind of you, Brother Thomas, but I'm not sure I'm ready for such a commitment. Oh, but I think you are. In fact, I'm quite certain of it. You see, Catherine, or should I say Sarah, we know exactly who you are and what you've been doing. The room fell silent. Walsh immediately began typing commands into her computer, initiating emergency protocols. Brother Thomas continued, his voice now cold and threatening. You have 24 hours to cease your investigation and destroy all evidence you've gathered. If you don't, we'll be forced to add you to our collection. And I assure you, your disappearance will be much more permanent than the others. You're threatening a federal investigation, Sarah said, finding her voice. Am I? I'm simply offering spiritual guidance to a troubled soul. The FBI has no evidence of wrongdoing at our monastery. We're a respected religious institution with powerful friends in government, law enforcement, and the media. Who do you think they'll believe? The line went dead. Walsh immediately picked up her secure phone and began issuing orders to her team. We're moving to immediate action, she announced. Sarah, you're going into protective custody. Detective Santos, I need you to coordinate with Boston PD for additional security around the Herald building and Marcus's home. What about the raid? Sarah asked. We can't let them destroy evidence or move the victims. We're not ready for a raid. We need more evidence, more coordination with other field offices. If we move too soon and fail to make charges stick, they'll disappear and set up somewhere else. Marcus, who had been uncharacteristically quiet, suddenly spoke up. What if we don't give them 24 hours? What if we force their hand tonight? What do you mean? Walsh asked. Sarah goes back to the monastery tonight, but this time she's wired for sound and video, and you have teams positioned around the perimeter. If they try to take her, you have them on kidnapping charges. If they don't, she might be able to gather the evidence you need from inside. Absolutely not, Walsh said immediately. That's far too dangerous. It's the only way, Sarah said quietly. If we wait, they'll move the victims or eliminate the evidence. How many people will suffer while we build a perfect case? Detective. Santos looked conflicted. Sarah, if something goes wrong, then at least we'll have tried. Agent Walsh, how many victims did you say were in the network? Over 1,000? Walsh nodded reluctantly. Then we don't have a choice. We go tonight. As the team began planning the operation, none of them noticed the small listening device that had been planted in Walsh's office earlier that day, or the figure watching the courthouse from a building across the harbor. Brother Thomas and his network had survived for over a decade by staying one step ahead of law enforcement, and they had no intention of being caught now. The final confrontation was about to begin, and the stakes had never been higher. The autumn wind whipped across Boston Harbor as Sarah adjusted the nearly invisible camera and microphone that FBI technicians had concealed in her clothing. It was 11:47 p.m., and St. Augustine's Monastery loomed before her like a Gothic nightmare against the cloudy sky. Every window was dark except for a few on the upper floors, where soft light suggested someone was awake and waiting. Audio check. Agent Walsh's voice whispered through the tiny earpiece hidden in Sarah's ear canal. Clear, Sarah whispered back, her breath forming small clouds in the cold air. Remember, we have teams positioned at every exit, but we can't move until we have clear evidence of criminal activity. If you feel threatened, use the code word sanctuary and we'll come in immediately. Sarah approached the monastery's main entrance, her heart pounding so hard she worried the surveillance equipment might pick it up. The brass bell seemed to echo through the night when she rang it, and within moments, the heavy door opened. Brother Thomas stood in the doorway, no longer bothering with his warm, pastoral smile. Behind him, Sarah could see two other men in dark clothing who were definitely not monks. Sarah Mitchell, he said, his voice carrying a mixture of satisfaction and menace. Right on time. Please come in. The interior of the monastery felt different at night. The warm, welcoming atmosphere from her previous visit had been replaced by something cold and predatory. The men flanked her as Brother Thomas led her through corridors she hadn't seen before, deeper into the building's interior. I must admit, I'm impressed by your persistence, Brother Thomas said as they walked. Most journalists would have backed down after the first warning. But you kept digging, kept asking questions. That kind of dedication is admirable, if misguided. They descended a stone staircase that Sarah was certain hadn't been part of her original tour. The air grew colder and carried a smell she couldn't identify, something between disinfectant and fear. Where are we going? She asked, trying to keep her voice steady. To see the truth you've been so desperate to uncover. I think it's time you understood exactly what you've been interfering with. The staircase ended at a heavy metal door that required both a key card and a numeric code to open. Beyond it lay a corridor lined with cells. There was no other word for them. Each had a small window, and through several, Sarah could see young faces peering out with expressions of terror and desperation. My God, she whispered, forgetting about the surveillance equipment. God has nothing to do with this, Brother Thomas replied. This is about supply and demand, about providing a service to people with very specific needs and very deep pockets. They stopped in front of one of the cells, and Brother Thomas gestured for her to look inside. A young man, perhaps 19 years old, sat on a narrow cot. His eyes were hollow, his spirit clearly broken. "Meet Timothy," Brother Thomas said. Casually, "He came to us 6 months ago through our youth outreach program. Troubled background, no family support. Perfect for our purposes. Timothy has been trained to be very accommodating to his future owner's needs." Sarah felt bile rise in her throat. "You're selling human beings. We're providing a service. There are wealthy individuals around the world who have particular tastes that can't be satisfied through conventional means. We identify suitable candidates, prepare them properly, and facilitate their placement in appropriate homes. This is slavery, this is torture, this is business. A very lucrative business that has allowed St. Augustine's to expand its operations significantly. The legitimate programs you saw during your first visit, they're funded entirely by our private services." As they continued down the corridor, Sarah counted at least 20 cells, most of them occupied. The victims ranged in age from what appeared to be late teens to mid-20s, both male and female, though males predominated. "The beauty of our operation," Brother Thomas continued, seemingly enjoying her horror, "is its legitimacy. We're a respected religious institution. When someone disappears from our programs, people assume they've found spiritual peace and chosen to disconnect from their old lives. Who questions a monastery?" They reached the end of the corridor, where a larger room contained what looked like a medical facility. Examination tables, for equipment, and cabinets full of pharmaceutical supplies lined the walls. "This is where we prepare our products for delivery," Brother Thomas explained. "Proper medical screening, psychological conditioning, and when necessary, chemical compliance assistance." A man in a white coat emerged from a side room, and Sarah recognized him as someone she'd seen in the monastery's promotional materials. Dr. Richard Kellerman, supposedly the facility's counselor and spiritual advisor. "Is this our journalist?" Dr. Kellerman asked, his voice clinical and detached. "Indeed." "Sarah Mitchell, meet Dr. Kellerman. He's been instrumental in developing our conditioning protocols." "Fascinating case study," Dr. Kellerman said, studying Sarah like a specimen. "Investigative journalists often have strong psychological profiles, persistent, curious, resistant to authority. The conditioning process will be particularly interesting." Sarah's blood ran cold. "You're planning to add you to our inventory?" "Yes," Brother Thomas confirmed. "You've seen too much, learned too much. But don't worry, you'll be placed with someone who appreciates intelligent, spirited women. Though that spirit will need to be adjusted first." Through her earpiece, Sarah heard Agent Walsh's voice. "We're moving in. Keep them talking. How long has this been going on?" Sarah asked, trying to buy time. 13 years, Brother Thomas said proudly. "We started small, just a few special arrangements for wealthy benefactors. But word spread in certain circles, and demand grew exponentially. We now have clients in 12 countries and gross over $50 million annually." The other monasteries Agent Walsh mentioned. "They're part of your network?" Brother Thomas looked surprised. "Agent Walsh? FBI agent Jennifer Walsh?" Sarah realized her mistake immediately, but it was too late. "You're wearing surveillance equipment," Dr. Kellerman said, pulling out what looked like a medical scanner. "Very sophisticated. Federal grade." Alarms began blaring throughout the facility. Brother Thomas grabbed a radio from his belt and began shouting orders. Code red. Federal raid imminent. Begin evacuation protocol immediately. The sound of splintering wood and shouting voices echoed from above as the FBI teams breached the monastery's entrances. But Sarah was trapped in the basement with 2 desperate criminals and 20 terrified victims. "Sanctuary!" she shouted, hoping her earpiece was still transmitting. "Sanctuary! Brother Thomas pulled out a gun and pointed it at her head. "You've destroyed everything we've built here, but you won't live to see us prosecuted." The lights went out, plunging the underground facility into darkness. In the chaos that followed, Sarah heard gunshots, screaming, and the sound of cell doors being opened. Someone grabbed her arm in the darkness, and she couldn't tell if it was friend or foe. The final battle for St. Augustine's had begun. The darkness in the monastery's basement was absolute, broken only by the muzzle flashes of gunfire and the beams of tactical flashlights as FBI agents poured down the stone staircase. Sarah pressed herself against the cold wall, trying to stay out of the crossfire while chaos erupted around her. "Federal agents, drop your weapons." Agent Walsh's voice cut through the noise as her team secured the underground facility. Brother Thomas's voice came from somewhere in the darkness. "You're too late. The primary assets have already been moved." Sarah heard the distinctive sound of metal doors slamming shut, emergency barriers designed to compartmentalize the facility. Through her earpiece, she could hear Walsh coordinating with multiple teams. "Team 2, secure the upper levels. Team 3, find the building schematics. There have to be other exits down here." Emergency lighting flickered on, casting eerie red shadows throughout the corridor. Sarah could see that several of the cells were now empty, their doors standing open. But in the confusion, she also saw victims huddled together, too terrified to move even though they were being rescued. Dr. Kellerman emerged from the medical facility with his hands raised, but his expression was one of smug satisfaction, rather than defeat. "Agent Walsh, I presume? You're going to find this operation much more complicated than you anticipated. Where are the missing victims?" Walsh demanded, her weapon trained on him. "Gone. We've had evacuation protocols in place for years. The moment your teams breached the upper levels, our most valuable assets were moved through tunnels that connect to the old subway system. They're probably halfway to Logan Airport by now." Sarah felt a surge of despair. After everything they'd been through, the monsters were still going to escape with their victims. "However," Dr. Kellerman continued, "I think you'll find the evidence we've left behind quite illuminating. You see, St. Augustine's was never the top of this organization. We were middle management at best." Agent Walsh's expression darkened. "What are you talking about?" "The network you've uncovered spans far beyond a few monasteries. We have clients and partners in government, law enforcement, entertainment, technology, pillars of society who have been protecting and funding our operations for over a decade." From deeper in the facility came the sound of machinery starting up, industrial shredders destroying evidence. But Dr. Kellerman seemed unconcerned. "Shred all you want," he called out to his associates. "The real records are stored elsewhere, and they contain names that would shock the American public. Senators, judges, CEOs, even some of your fellow federal agents, Agent Walsh." Sarah's journalistic instincts kicked in despite the danger. "You're saying law enforcement has been compromised? How do you think we operated for 13 years without detection? How do you think missing person cases got closed so quickly? We had friends in very high places, people who made sure investigations went nowhere." Agent Walsh spoke into her. "Radio, I need a complete communications blackout on this operation. No information goes out until we've verified the integrity of everyone involved." The sound of approaching sirens filled the air as Boston police units arrived to secure the perimeter. But Sarah noticed that Dr. Kellerman's confidence never wavered, even as he was being handcuffed. "You might want to be careful who you trust, Agent Walsh," he said as he was led away. "Some of your backup might not be here to help." 20 minutes later, the basement had been secured and the remaining victims were being evacuated. Sarah counted 14 people rescued from the cells, ranging in age from 17 to 25. Each would need extensive medical and psychological care, but they were alive and free. Detective Santos appeared at Sarah's side, her face grim. We found Brother Thomas's body in his office upstairs. Single gunshot wound to the head. Apparent suicide, but the gun was wiped clean. Or someone silenced him before he could talk, Sarah replied. That's what I'm thinking. We also found his computer completely destroyed and his files burned. But Sarah, we did find something. She led Sarah upstairs to Brother Thomas's office, where FBI technicians were processing the scene. On the desk was a leather-bound journal, partially burned, but still readable. It's a client list, Detective Santos explained. Names, addresses, preferences, payment records. Some of the names ... Jesus, Sarah, this goes all the way to Washington. Agent Walsh joined them, her expression troubled. I've been in contact with FBI headquarters. They're sending a special task force to take over this investigation. The scope is beyond what our field office can handle. What about the victims who were moved? Sarah asked. We have teams at Logan Airport, and we've issued alerts to all transportation hubs in the region. But honestly, if they had a well-planned evacuation route, they're probably already out of the country. Sarah felt a mixture of triumph and frustration. They had exposed the operation and rescued 14 people, but dozens more remained in captivity, and the network's leadership had escaped. There's something else, Agent Walsh said quietly. We found evidence that this operation has been under federal surveillance for months. Someone in Washington knew about St. Augustine's and chose not to act. Meaning this cover-up goes higher than we thought. And it means everyone involved in this investigation is now a target. As if to emphasize her point, Sarah's phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. You've won this battle, but the war is far from over. We know where you live, where you work, where your family lives. Stop now, or face the consequences. Detective Santos read the message over Sarah's shoulder. We need to get you into protective custody immediately. No, Sarah said firmly. We need to publish this story. The public has a right to know what's been happening, and exposure is the only thing that will protect us now. Agent Walsh nodded reluctantly. You're right. But we need to be strategic about it. If we release everything at once, the people at the top of this network will have time to cover their tracks and eliminate witnesses. Then we release it in stages, Sarah said, her mind already working on the strategy. Start with the monastery, the rescued victims, the local connections. Build public outrage and media attention. Then, when we have maximum visibility, we release the bigger names. As dawn broke over Boston, casting long shadows across the monastery's grounds, Sarah realized that their investigation was far from over. They had cracked open a conspiracy that reached into the highest levels of American society, and the powerful people involved would do anything to keep their secrets buried. The real battle was just beginning. 6 months after the raid on St. Augustine's Monastery, Sarah Mitchell stood before a packed auditorium at Boston University, delivering the keynote address at a conference on investigative journalism and human trafficking. The past half year had been a whirlwind of congressional hearings, federal trials, and media appearances, but tonight felt like a moment of reflection and closure. The story of St. Augustine's taught me that evil often hides behind the most respectable facades, Sarah told the audience of journalists, law enforcement officials, and survivors' advocates. But it also taught me that truth, no matter how deeply buried, will eventually surface when brave people refuse to stay silent. In the front row sat Detective Maria Santos, now heading Boston PD's new human trafficking task force, and Agent Jennifer Walsh, who had been promoted to lead the FBI's Northeast Regional Anti-Trafficking Division. Next to them sat Marcus Chun, whose coverage of the story had won the Boston Herald a Pulitzer Prize for public service. The investigation had ultimately exposed a network spanning 12 states and 6 countries, leading to 347 arrests and the rescue of over 800 victims. The client list found in Brother Thomas's office had triggered the largest corruption Investigation in federal law enforcement history, resulting in the resignation of 2 senators, the indictment of a federal judge, and the exposure of a conspiracy that reached into the highest levels of government and business. The 14 survivors we rescued from St. Augustine's basement have shown incredible courage in their recovery. Sarah continued. Many have chosen to speak publicly about their experiences, helping law enforcement identify other victims and dismantle similar operations around the world. Among those survivors was James, the hollow-eyed young man Sarah had met during her first visit to the monastery. Now 23 and enrolled in community college, he had become one of the most effective advocates for trafficking victims, working with federal agencies to identify and shut down other operations. The hardest part wasn't the physical captivity, James had told Sarah in a recent interview. It was the psychological conditioning, the way they made us believe we were worthless, that no one was looking for us, that we deserved what was happening. Recovery means rebuilding not just your life, but your sense of self-worth. Dr. Richard Kellerman had been sentenced to life in prison without parole, but not before providing crucial testimony that helped authorities understand the network's psychological manipulation techniques. His cooperation had been motivated not by remorse, but by a desire to reduce his sentence, a request that was ultimately denied. Brother Thomas's death remained officially classified as suicide, though Sarah and the investigators suspected. He had been silenced by his superiors to prevent him from revealing more damaging information. The monastery itself had been seized by federal authorities and converted into a victim services center, a fitting transformation that Sarah found deeply satisfying. But perhaps the most important lesson, Sarah told her audience, is that this kind of evil persists because good people choose to look away, to assume that someone else will handle it, to believe that such horrors couldn't possibly exist in their communities. The investigation had revealed that dozens of people, neighbors, city officials, even some police officers, had noticed suspicious activity at St. Augustine's over the years, but had dismissed their concerns or failed to report them. The monastery's reputation and Brother Thomas's charismatic public persona had provided perfect camouflage for the horrors occurring behind its walls. After her speech, Sarah was approached by Carmen Restrepo, David's sister, who had flown in from Miami for the conference. The 2 women had become close during the investigation, bonded by their shared determination to find the truth about David's disappearance. Any word from the task force in Colombia? Carmen asked quietly. Sarah nodded, her expression cautiously optimistic. Agent Walsh thinks they've identified the facility where David and several other victims were taken. The Colombian authorities are planning a raid next week. It had taken months of international cooperation, but investigators had traced the network's South American operations to a remote compound outside Bogotá. Satellite surveillance and intelligence from captured network members suggested that dozens of victims, including David, might still be held there. I keep telling myself not to get my hopes up, Carmen said, tears in her eyes. It's been over 6 years since David disappeared. Even if he's alive, what condition will he be in? Sarah took her hand. Whatever condition he's in, he'll have people who love him waiting to help him heal. That's more than many survivors have. The conference continued for 2 more days, bringing together experts from around the world to share strategies for combating human trafficking. Sarah was struck by how many similar operations had been uncovered in the wake of the St. Augustine's investigation, as if exposing one network had given others the courage to come forward with their own discoveries. On the final day, Sarah received a call from Agent Walsh with news that made her heart race. The Colombian raid was successful, Walsh said, her voice filled with emotion. They rescued 43 victims, including several Americans. Sarah, David Restrepo is alive. Sarah immediately called Carmen, who broke down sobbing at the news. David was severely traumatized and would require extensive medical and psychological care, but he was alive and free. After 6 years of captivity, he was coming home. "There's more," Agent Walsh continued. "The intelligence we gathered from the Colombian operation has led to raids in 3 other countries. We estimate we'll rescue at least 200 more victims in the next month." As Sarah hung up the phone, she reflected on the journey that had brought her to this moment. It had started with an anonymous letter and a journalist's instinct that something was wrong. It had nearly cost her life, and had certainly changed it forever. But it had also resulted in justice for hundreds of victims and the exposure of a conspiracy that had operated in darkness for far too long. That evening, Sarah returned to her apartment in Boston's North End, the same apartment she had lived in when this all began. The threats against her had largely ceased after the network's leadership was captured or killed, but she still maintained security precautions that had become second nature. On her desk was a new stack of letters from readers, many of them from survivors of trafficking or family members of missing persons. Each letter reminded her why the work mattered, why the risks had been worth taking. One letter in particular caught her attention. It was from a teenager in Seattle who suspected that a local youth center was involved in suspicious activities. The handwriting was shaky, the paper cheap, but the words burned with familiar urgency. "They hurt us. They made us disappear. Someone needs to know the truth." Sarah smiled grimly and reached for her phone to call Agent Walsh. The work was far from over, but she had learned that even the most powerful conspiracies could be brought down by determined people who refused to stay silent. Outside her window, the lights of Boston Harbor twinkled in the darkness, and somewhere in that city, other stories waited to be told, other truths waited to be uncovered. Sarah Mitchell, investigative journalist, was ready for whatever came next. The fight for justice never truly ends. It simply moves to the next battlefield.